So tell me if this scenario sounds familiar to you woodworkers. 3 or 4 years ago, my interest got piqued with spoon carving. I mean, it's green woodworking, so the wood would be free, and it didn't seem to require that many tools. And from what I observed, it was something a little bit more relaxing than a lot of woodworking, because after you do the axe work or getting out stuff, it's just a little whittling. Something I could do after dinner, not make a huge mess, so I wouldn't have to clean the shop up again, and I can maybe watch TV while I'm doing it. Just relaxing right before bed. So it really piqued my interest. So what did? I looked at all the tools you required. I looked at ones that I would use in other aspects. And the first tool I bought was a froe. Because green woodworking, splitting the logs, well, I use split logs all the time in wood turning, and I figured this might save me some little time with the chainsaw. Just bring the whole log back and split it out. And I have used it for smaller logs that way. Well, guess what happened after I bought that first tool? My interest kind of waned. You ever have that happen? You get going into it, you do all the research, you buy 1 or 2 tools, and then it kind of peters off. There you go. Then about 2 years ago, I started doing art markets quite a bit. And when I initially started, I tried to do a different demonstration every single time I showed up. Sometimes I would bring out the scroll saw, but I found that it was kind of small and it was hard to interact, and there wasn't a lot of motion going on, so it didn't really entertain the crowd. I also built myself a small little demonstrator workbench where I would cut dovetails, Mortise tenons and stuff like that. But once again, for the general audience, that wasn't that entertaining, so I ended up selling that workbench. And right now I do a lot of wood turning because it's somewhat dynamic. You can get the audience involved. You can hand them little markers so they can color tops and stuff like that. You can make magic wands for kids. So it's a lot of entertaining. But what I've found recently is a lot of markets don't like demonstrators like me, and I refuse to just sit behind the counter as a cashier at an art register. I've got to do something to just keep my brain going, and if I'm sitting there for 12 hours, I might as well make stuff that I can sell. So I want a demonstration that's not going to make a big mess, that's not going to make a lot of noise, that I could kind of maybe hide in the background. Maybe I bring out already roughed out spoons and just carve them up and sell them that way, or chip carve them. Something that I can do while I'm there and demonstrate, and maybe even hand people a knife and let them do a little carving. Educate them a little bit on what it's like to do woodworking. Kind of what I enjoy doing. So guess what popped back up into my mind? Spoon carving again. So doing a lot of research, I bought the DVDs. This one's from Peter Follansbee. I really do like this one. Lee Nielsen, I think, produces it. And off of his recommendation, for my birthday last year, I bought myself a carving axe from Robin Wood. And then for Christmas, I bought myself a spoon carving knife, which is the recommendation, again, from Robin Wood. It's fairly inexpensive. A lot of people said that they were pretty good. And then a few weeks ago, I got myself a little moyer knife, Sloyd style knife for the carving aspect, for the whittling aspect. So there we go. It took me 3 or 4 years to accumulate just a little bit of tools for that initial peak of interest for spoon carving. Anybody else fall in that category? Am I done yet? Am I ready to carve? No. I still need to get some kind of stump to carve onto, and a stump is big and heavy, and honestly I don't want one just hanging around here because I'll probably turn it into a bowl blank and turn it. So I'm going to make just a heavy duty stool, and I'm going to make a carving bench out of that stool using materials I have around here. Something that's heavy duty enough that I can axe into it, but light enough that I could also carry it around to art markets. And I need to accommodate it that way. So that's what the design I'm going to come out with for this cheap and easy to build carving bench that we're going to be building today. So let me show you the materials we're going to be using. They're just stuff I happen to have around the shop. When I had my little school, I built about half of the workbenches using bench tops made out of architectural glulam. Now, glulam is just basically 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, all glued together from the manufacturer, and then they just got to mass produce it, and they somewhat get them parallel and straight. You see these a lot of times in like pools and stuff like that for those big beams that go across buildings and stuff. And it is actually fairly inexpensive. I want to say a 7 or 8 foot by 24 inch top for a workbench only ran me about $200 of this one. Now, I will say I was disappointed in what I got, is because architectural glulam versus regular glulam is supposed to have some aesthetic beauty to it. And these had knots and stuff like that that just weren't what you would call architecture. So I think I got a little bit ripped off on the price for the this right here, but it will work. Since then, I built my turning station with it, and I had 2 more offcuts from all the workbenches I've been just dragging around. So I'm going to use this as the top for my carving bench. I've also got some 2x4s left over from my shelf build that I'll use for the base. So let me show you what I'm thinking about for the design. Now, I'm talking to you about designing a carving workbench for spoon carving, having never actually gone through the full process of just using the hand tools. I've made spoons, bandsawing it out, and using a gouge to scoop out the spoon, but I've never done this technique. So, hey, take that with a grain of salt, what I'm talking about. What I've read is a lot of people, for safety aspects, when they're carving on a workbench, you have the person standing over here swinging the axe, and they always want to put the log on the far side. That way, if the axe misses the log, it will hit the stump. And that's a safety aspect. So I want to design something that will be as safe as possible. Now, that piece of glue lamb that I have is plus or minus 24 inches square. So my thinking was maybe I can cut out a small section right here and make it more like an artist palette. So I can stand right there real close to the workbench. So any irate blows will always hit that workbench instead of coming down. Whereas if I had that round circle, I couldn't get as close to the log. That's my thinking. The other thing about this design is I want to use a triangle for the stand. I don't want to have 4 legs. I want to have 3. For the simple reason, when you do art marking and stuff like that, a lot of times you're out in a field and I don't want it rocking around. With 3 legs, it'll always at least sit stable. It might not be flat, but it will be stable. So, I want to put a leg right here, a leg right there, and a leg right there. Now, the center of gravity of this is going to be right here, so I need to figure out a better design, maybe cocking a little bit so I can get the center of gravity in between the dead center of those triangles. But that's the idea. I also want to make sure I have one 90 degree just to make my construction easier. And I will probably put a stretcher in between stretchers here so I have a place for my legs to go to make it stable. That's the general thought idea. So the first thing I need to do, let's cut out this artist easel out of that glue lamp.
Now there are a lot of different ways of cutting out curves, but I have a bandsaw, so I was going to use a bandsaw. It just made it nice and easy. Just be sure you don't overcut the radius that your blade can handle. Might need to make 2 cuts. And I had a bit of a cold, so I wasn't feeling too good, so I just used a power sander. But notice I'm using hand tool planing techniques with a power sander to get it flat. I was really just trying to clean it up, but might as well make it flat while you're doing the same time. Now the top had such huge gaps on it, I took this opportunity for a little experiment. I've used sawdust and glue putty quite a bit often, but this was a big gap, so I want to see how obvious it was. And can I extol the virtues of chopsticks enough? Grab yourself an extra set every time you go out to a restaurant. Plus these silicone spatulas work great too.
Okay, next up I'm going to start working on the legs. And if I had been smart, I would have started with the legs first, because I think I want to have a double 2x4 glued together on the center post, and then the 2 rails will be a single 2x4. That way I have something to mortise and tenon into. Now the big question is how high to make it. And once again, I'm kind of doing this by the seat of my pants, but I've heard a lot of wood carvers who do spoon carving with knives talk about they were really thankful when they raised up their bench because their backs hurt a little bit less. So I don't want to have to be bending over when I am chopping like that. So I think with this being a 5-inch thick top, that I want to keep it right around waist height to start out with, and then I can lower it if I feel that I'm chopping too high. It'd be easier to lower it than have to rebuild the entire bottom structure. Now the center of gravity for this bench is always going to be somewhere right around there. And I want to have the legs totally encompass that center of gravity so that it will be stable. So I'm coming over here, I'm trying to figure out where to position my legs. I want to have at least 190 degrees for the main one just to make it easier for the construction aspect of it. So I think if I come over here and I come out an equal distance, 16 inches on each side, that will position one leg being about right there, another leg right there, and then the third leg right there, and that will encompass the center of gravity to make it at least a little stable. Okay, it's been a few hours, so let's see how this glue up is working out. At least it's smooth. Okay, so after dinner, I squared up some boards. My thickness jointer is down, but I may do by just running it flat and then on its side on the jointer, and then I ran it through the table saw for thicknessing. I have one board that's glued up, two boards together, and then I have two 2x4s. And instead of splaying it out, because I like to finish this up by the end of the day, I'm just going to do them straight, run a stretcher between them, and if it's unstable, I can always add leg extensions at a later date. It'll all work out in the end. I don't think it'll be that big a deal. And I believe that's the way it's going to look right now. So real quickly, I'm going to add some 2-inch tenons on these. I would then reposition it, draw the circles, square it out, hollow it out, and drive them in. Okay, so I got all the tenons cut now. I put my square back up here. I lined everything up where exactly what I'm going to want it to be. And to size my mortises just perfectly, I'm just going to do a pencil line around the bottoms of the tenons. That way everything's going to be lined up and it's going to be nice and square, so I can put a stretcher here and here very easily. Nice square shoulders. And that's kind of why I decided to go with, instead of splaying it out, is because I could use a power tools and it would be a tad bit quicker in this one instance. Now, if I wanted to splay it out, all it would mean is getting the angles right and probably hand cutting the shoulders, and I would probably still use the bandsaw to cut the shoulders of the tenons here by hand cutting the sides right there. Now, I want to show you something that I did on purpose. I want you to notice that when I cut the tenons, I purposely cut this shoulder only about 1/4 inch, and yet on the back one, the 3x3 leg, the thick leg, I cut it about 1/2 inch. That way this leg, back leg, when I put it up against this square in the corner, it is offset a little bit this way and a little bit this way. That way this leg does not line up perfectly flat when I come out to the side. That will allow me, whenever I put a stretcher in here, when I mortise it into this back leg, to put it into a little bit more meat. And since I'm going to be hatcheting on towards the back of this, I figured this leg would be taking more of the impact, more of the brunt, so I wanted it to be a tad bit sturdier. I did this offset on purpose so I could get this mortise a little bit more towards the center, but not too much towards the center where the two sides would line up and hit in the middle.
Now, I know a lot of furniture makers that seem to go through geometry hoops to get their mortises all perfectly laid out. Me, I found the simplest answer is a lot of times the best answer. I just grab a framing square, lined up all my tenons with that, and then just used a pencil to mark them out. And once I did that one, I like to use a chisel to do the layout to get it just perfectly, because it tends to break the fibers and makes drilling out the holes cleaner.
The lead thread on this bit is roughly 16 revolutions per inch. So if I turn this handle 16 times, I'll go down 1 inch. So I need to go about 32 to get about 2 inches in. And basically all I'm going to do is line it up in the center, kind of balance it out. And once it starts cutting, right there, I start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Whoops, I went too far. Clear out the junk. Let's see how deep we went. I went 36, so it's probably going to be 2 1/4 inches. A little over 2 1/4 inches.
Now when you start chiseling out the waste, don't be too delicate. This is a mortise. Nobody's got x-ray vision. Nobody's going to see inside the wood to see if there's any tear out. Your idea here is just to get it accurate. So I put a little bit of steeper micro bevel on my chisels and just bang away. I'm not being too delicate on this one. Lean on it. Square up the shoulders, blow it out. You'll get a nice square hole and be done with it. Move on. Mortises shouldn't take too long to do.
So we have all the legs mortised in. They're all set up. I want to make sure that they're somewhat square to make it easy for me to cut. So I now need to cut the stretchers. I'm going to put a mortise and tenon on this one. And the easiest way I know to lay it out is not to measure. Just come over, put the work down, get it nice and square where you want it, and mark it directly off the piece. Can't get any more accurate than that. Now I am using a pencil right now simply because this is just a shop appliance. I'm not too concerned about overall accuracy. If I'm within 1/128th of an inch, I'm happy there. So there we go. I now know where my shoulders need to be on that tenon so that this distance will be the exact same distance that it is on bottom, which means this will be nice and square when it goes together. Easy peasy. Oh, and one last thing to remember. This probably won't be able to go together any other way, but you might as well mark everything so that you know they are going to go back in the same spot. So here we go. I have the little stretchers that are going to go on. I cut tenons on them and shoulders, just the same way I did the tenons on these legs on the table saw and bandsaw. I did make sure I got these as a perfect 1/2 inch. This is the first time in this whole project I've actually had to measure something fairly accurately, other than just laying it out. I did that one because I'm going to use a hollow chisel mortiser to cut the mortises on these two edges right here. Right now, I just need to make sure I get this distance correct and them all at the same spot. And because I hate measuring, what did I do? I cut one stick, and all these legs are all the way down, resting their shoulders so they can't go any deeper. So the simple way for me to do this is to just drop that in right there, mark the top, use this to mark the bottom, and there we go. I have the perfect distance, and I'll do the same thing on all the legs. Mark the bottom, mark the top, and I know where to put my hollow chisel mortiser.
Now softwoods like pine and fir, they typically fracture, splinter really easy on the edge, so go ahead and round over everything. I use this little hand plane all the time. I think I got it from Lee Value. They're probably about 20 bucks. But it makes roundovers exceptionally easy. And if you're like me, you carefully measure the amount of glue you put into your joint. Really, is there any woodworker that just doesn't slop it all on? And you gotta love chopsticks for this. Applying glue and then throw them away. They're just great. Now's the time for assembly. Just pound in the proper stretcher. Remember, all these stretchers are probably going to be different sizes, so you got to get it in the right spot, especially since glue's there. And just assemble the stretchers first. That way you can just drop in the frame into the top after you apply glue. With chopsticks, of course. Now this isn't a project that should need clamps, which means you need to pound the base into the top very evenly so that the gap doesn't open up on those stretchers. So just take your time, make a few swipes on each leg until the whole thing goes down fairly evenly. And yes, it is a bit tight because the glue swells up a little bit.
So I add a little strength. I'm going to put a little cross member right here. I'm just going to dovetail it in. Just kind of eyeball where I think it should be. Use a pencil to mark my baselines for the dovetails. And then cut them out. I need to transfer lines all the way around. And I'm basically going to make these dovetails a 10 and a half dovetail. That way, it can only go in a little bit on the top board. So right now I'm just prepping the board to cut the dovetails.
Now I know of no better way of cutting angles than just clamping it down to your bench and grabbing a handsaw. Figuring out all those miters and angles on a table saw, you end up making a lot of test cuts, and by the time you got the machine set up, you could have been done. Especially if you're only making 8 or 9 for a small table. And also, sometimes there are easier ways to figure out measurements for a tenon than grabbing your marking gauge.
So this is going to be the bottom baseline, so I'm going to do this one a little bit more accurate than my other cuts, just because it might show if somebody turns the thing over. A lot of times I'll tilt the edge up to get that middle section because I have a tendency, a bad habit of kind of rounding over the top. So just using that front tooth a little bit to get that a little bit deeper, and they'll never show if I go a little bit too far.
After that, it's just a matter of cutting out the dovetails. I'm sorry I lost the footage for cutting the actual dovetails. Oh, and by the way, I occasionally have these twin screws available for sale on my website, and as of today, I have a couple used ones. Here I'm actually taking a direct measurement with my marking gauge of the tenon height so that I can create a baseline to cut on these rails so it won't go too far down. I typically will make it a tad bit shallower and plane it smooth so it comes out flush every single time. Now when I cut out the waist of dovetails in a long grain joint like this, I would typically take my chisel and kind of slightly tap in the baseline. That way there's less chance it's going to crack below that baseline. I do that on both sides. And then instead of just sawing it out with a coping saw, I'm going to make some relief cuts with a back saw, basically severing up the fiber so if a loose hit won't split the fiber too far and get away from me. And it doesn't take too long. I mean, this really is almost in real time. I take my chisel, I do not go to the baseline to make that first whack. I'll go about halfway, hit it, and look at how the grain split. If it dove down on the one side, I will come in from that low side. That way I know it will be splitting up and not getting away from me. And then it's just a matter of paring it smooth. Easy peasy. Now, in all my time making tables, I've never made one that didn't rock when I first built it. And this right here is a time-honored way of getting all the legs fairly even. Basically, find a flat substrate that is perfectly horizontal, put your table on it, and then you can rest it up and make it horizontal with little shims, and then cut up from that baseline. Just measure out, and it will be all consistent. Another advantage of having a workbench that's less than 2 feet across is on most tables I can actually clamp it to the top of the bench to make sawing those legs down a lot easier. Then it's just a matter of rounding it over. My shop stuff takes a lot of abuse and I drag it around. Having those bottoms rounded over means they'll split out less.
So there we go. I had me a little spoon carving bench. Something I'm not too worried about banging into, scratching up. We didn't put much effort into it. We didn't take too much time. I want to say I probably have 4, maybe 4.5 hours total invested in it. And obviously it didn't cost us too much. I had scrap 2x4s laying around and this piece of glue lamp from a bench build earlier on that I had no clue what I was going to do with. Now it serves a purpose. This little bench serves 100% of my design goals. And when I sit back and look at it, what's my overall impression of it? I'm disappointed. And I'm disappointed in myself. The project met its goals, but I skipped on what I could do. I just did what I knew how to do as fast as possible. I did it that way, and I knew the problems it's going to have. The main issue is it's got a little bit of twist involved in it. That doesn't detract anything from its usefulness. It's just there, and I know about it. I could have avoided it. I knew how to fix this problem. I knew it was going to happen when going in, and I disappointed myself and I skipped all my time and effort to build something like that. It wouldn't have taken that much more. Maybe a few strokes with a handsaw, a little bit more layout, and this could have been something that I would have been proud of. I would have used probably for 10, 15 years because you're not going to damage this thing that much over time. And it would have been great. As is, it's now a prototype. I'm probably going to spend another 4 or 5 hours rebuilding it because I'm a bit disappointed in myself. I hope y'all haven't had other projects like that, but it happens every now and then. You're in a rush, it's going to meet your goals, so you skip on your abilities, and there you go. In other words, I should have splayed the legs out. I knew this was going to be the issue. I should have taken the time, done the angles, done the math, done the layout, hand cut the shoulders, and been done with it, and it would have been just fine for me. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to support our channel to get more like this, please visit our website, wortheffort.com, and keep a lookout. I'm going to have a T-shirt of the month club coming up. I'm working on original artwork right now, and that should be popping just any week now. I'm kind of excited about that. I think that's going to be what's going to fund the entire channel for us. An inexpensive T-shirt with original art, something that you can actually use, and it'll help support the school. Keep an eye out on it. And remember one last thing. It is always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Now to go find some wood to learn how to carve spoons with.